first episode of Stranger Things opens with a Hawkins scientist running through the lab trying to escape a monster. This will be our first preview of the main threat of the season. We cut to a group of kids playing D&D in a basement. This is Mike, Will, Dustin, and Lucas. It's after this game, on the way home, that Will Byers runs into the monster that escaped from Hawkins' lab, and he ends up vanishing without a trace. From here, Will's mom, played by Winona Ryder, approaches Chief Hopper, played by David Harbour, and he seems quite skeptical that kid is missing at all. This is the guy who has not seen too much action. Hawkins is a very low-key town, so he's thinking, okay, this kid's just missing. He's just hiding, he's running away, he's acting like a kid. But of course, he is the chief, and he has a history of choice, so he does agree to look into it, as his job does require. Now let's talk about arguably the main character of this series. I really think it might be this character, and I'm talking, of course, about 11. When we first meet her, she has just escaped from Hawkins' lab, and she eventually finds her way to Benny's and tries to steal some food from him because she's really hungry. She's been on the run for quite a bit of time. He feeds her some food, tries to find out more about her, and calls for some help, but he gets shot dead when that help shows up and is nothing more than just a dirty Hawkins employee. Because Hawkins' lab is well aware that one of their experiments has gotten loose, and they are trying to make sure that they are cleaning up their loose ends, and they are willing to do anything and everything to make sure that this is kept quiet. After leaving Benny's, 11 runs into Mike and the gang, who are out looking for Will. Mike brings 11 to his house, hides her in his basement, and tries to help her feel safe. And it's at this point, when she's in this basement, looking through all of Mike's pictures, that she notices a photo of Will, and she feels like she recognizes him. She points right at him. Mike, Lucas, and Dustin all take interest in her claim that she has seen Will and that he is trapped in a place called the Upside Down. Now that is a big location for Stranger Things. It is a central part of this plot, and it's a really cool place. I mean, it's really cool looking. The design is really cool. It's actually an awful place full of disgusting floating spores and giant monsters. But that's getting sidetracked. The Upside Down is a place that you cannot get to unless you have a doorway. And they find out that in order to have a doorway that would lead to some kind of a pocket dimension like this, you have to have a lot of energy. And as it turns out, they do know somebody who's capable of making that kind of energy, but they don't really realize that 11 has actually seen this door. So they go out looking for it, and she's keeping very quiet. She doesn't really want to find this gate because, of course, that means going back to Hawkins' lab, which she just escaped from. Now, here's something I should mention in case people forgot, and I don't really know how you could, but of course, 11 has telekinetic and psychic abilities, and she has these abilities because of an experiment that her mom went through when she was still pregnant with her. We don't really know the full extent of these experiments, but we do know that these people that volunteered were given drugs and put into these water tanks to have these effects tested on them. And somehow throughout that experiment, these abilities ended up getting passed to baby Jane. We do end up meeting 11's mom when Hopper and Joyce go on a side quest to investigate the mystery of a child that they think could be related to Hawkins' lab. Now, why do they think that? Well, let's jump back a bit because I did leap forward in order to address the powers that 11 has. So eventually a body is recovered from a quarry, and this is supposedly the body of Will Byers, but something doesn't add up, and Joyce refuses to believe that this is in fact her son because she remembers speaking to Will just the night before using these lights. So if he was alive and communicating to her through these Christmas lights, then how can he really be dead? Hopper, on the other hand, takes that finding of the body at face value until he starts to question who it is exactly that found that body. It was someone who wasn't supposed to be there, and as it turns out, he was only there because he was told to be there, and he was also instructed not to let anyone get too close to the body that they found. Now that is hella fishy, right? And Hopper thinks so too, which is why he breaks into the morgue and looks at Will's body, only to find out that that body is fake. So now, armed with the knowledge that Hawkins' lab planted a fake body, well, it kind of makes them seem hella suspicious. We actually have two missing person cases in this first season. We have, of course, Will, but we also have Barb. Barb is Nancy's friend. Nancy is Mike's sister. Her and Barb go to a party one night at Steve's house, and Barb ends up taken by the Demogorgon into the Upside Down. Poor Barb. Poor Barb. So now let's talk about Nancy, Steve, and Jonathan. As I said, Nancy is Mike's sister, and she's dating Steve. Steve, for most of the season, is a big douchebag, but he does eventually turn around and become a much more likable character. Jonathan is Will's brother, and although at first he thinks his mom is crazy for thinking that Will is alive, he starts to change his tune as he starts helping Nancy look for Barb. They eventually set out to to find the Demogorgon that took Barb, and it's during this mission that Nancy ends up being the first person in the main cast to enter the Upside Down. She finds a doorway in a tree that takes her into the Upside Down, where she comes face to face with a Demogorgon and narrowly escapes with her life. So we've got a fake Will body, Barb is missing, and Hawkins' lab is dead at the center of all of this. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas are initially very hurt after this body is found, and Mike even lashes out at Eleven for giving him false hope that Will is in fact alive. But Eleven is actually able to prove that Will is in fact alive by showing the boys that she can reach out to him. They head to the school where Eleven dons this really interesting blonde wig, and she uses this much stronger radio to reach out to Will and confirms to the boys that yes, Will is alive, and she even takes a moment to embarrass a bully in a very, very satisfying scene. Who doesn't love bullies getting beat up and humiliated? And I should mention that all the while during this whole investigation process that the boys are doing, Dr. Brenner is continuing to track down the movements of Eleven, determined to find his property and bring her back where she belongs. He does even manage to track her down, but Eleven uses some of those badass powers of hers and escapes with the boys. Hopper and Joyce rescue Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Eleven and bring them to the school where everyone gets a formal introduction to Eleven and her super awesome powers. It's there where they find out confirmation that yes, Will is alive, but Barb is very much dead. Again, sorry Barb. Sorry Barb. Hopper and Joyce leave and break into Hawkins' lab, get caught, and eventually Hopper makes a deal with Brenner so that he and Joyce can go through the gate, rescue Will, and forget all of this ever happened. And I'm not exactly sure the full extent of what deal was made, but Hopper ends up telling Brenner exactly where to find Eleven, which so happens to be at the school with the boys. The Hawkins lackeys and Brenner head to the school to recover Eleven, but she makes quick work of them and ends up creating enough carnage to bring out the Demogorgon, the monster from the Upside Down, which happens to be attracted to the smell of blood, which she just left a lot of. The Demogorgon kills the Hawkins flukies and even attacks Dr. Brenner, although we never actually see him die. That's important to think about. Cornered and in danger, Eleven uses her powers to save the boys from the Demogorgon, but the power she exerts causes her to literally vanish. Meanwhile, Joyce and Hopper find Will in the Upside Down, and he's in a bad way. Hopper attempts to resuscitate Will, and we see flashbacks of Hopper's own personal experience with loss. We find out during the season that Hopper once had a daughter named Sarah, who died of cancer, pretty much taking everything that he cared about with him, leaving him very much an empty shell of a person, a very moody guy. That's the guy we're seeing here, and who can blame him really? You lose a kid to cancer, it's gonna totally change everything about you. Will is finally resuscitated, and we see the boys picking up the pieces of this horrible ordeal. It seems like a happy ending, but at the end of the episode, we get some little nuggets of what's to come. We see Hopper leaving some Eggos out in a box in the middle of the woods, a sign that Eleven is in fact alive, and another huge nugget comes when we see Will cough up a slug and suddenly get a glimpse of the Upside Down while he's in the bathroom. He's in the bathroom and suddenly he's in the Upside Down version of his bathroom. So it would seem like the Upside Down is not finished with Will. Season 2 introduces us to a lot of new faces, which is something I think is a really cool part of this show. I like how they are constantly keeping things fresh by bringing in these new faces. It helps to, just liven things up a bit. Our new characters this season are Bob, Max, Murray, Billy, and Dr. Owens. So keep your ears peeled because we're going to talk about all of those new characters right now. During season 2, we see that the Upside Down is not done torturing Will, nor is it done torturing Hawkins for that matter. Right in the first episode, while the boys are at the arcade, Will gets into one of his glimpses from the Upside Down, and it's during this glimpse that we are introduced to the season's new main villain, the Mind Flayer, a really, really scary looking creature that is actually kind of cool looking at the same time. And the name Mind Flayer is yet again another name that the boys pulled out of their D&D books. Now regarding these episodes that Will is having, he actually does tell people about them. He tells his mom, Hopper, and Dr. Owens, who works at Hawkins' lab and is running the place now that Dr. Brenner has died. Or has he? Dr. Owens believes that the visions Will is seeing are most likely brought on by PTSD, and Hopper agrees. Joyce, on the other hand, well, we know how she is. She's a very fiercely protective mom, and who can blame her after what happened to Will in season 1? She's asking questions. It's after Hopper gets called out to look over some rotten pumpkins that he starts to believe that maybe there is something weird going on here with Hawkins, and he becomes convinced that it's all coming from the lab. So after not only finding 2 separate pumpkin patches with rot, but also trees in the forest, he demands that Dr. Owens and the employees at Hawkins' lab go and investigate the areas to make sure that it is in fact not coming from the lab. Dr. Owens at first says, hey, you don't get to give me orders, but Hopper pulls out that big voice that we know he has, and he says, do it. Jumping over to our main kids, we get a couple new additions to Hawkins' school, Max and Billy. They are actually step-siblings, and Billy is a mostly horrible racist bully, but we do find out later in the season that Billy's dad is an abusive asshole, and it seems like he's taking that pain that his dad is pummeling onto him and just spreading the love. That's how it goes a lot of times. Behind every bully, there's another bully. Now, the boys' first introduction to Max is actually in the premiere episode when they see the name Mad Max on the leaderboard at the arcade on a game called Dig Dug. Dustin had previously held that high score, and after Lucas and Dustin figure out that it's her, that she is Mad Max, they both seem pretty interested in her, and we get almost a little competition going between these two as to who's going to win the prize. Mike, on the other hand, does not want a new girl in the party. He wants 11 back in his life, so he treats Max pretty shitty for most of this season. Speaking of 11, at the end of season 1, we saw her fight that Demogorgon, and during that fight, her and the Demogorgon both vanish. Well, it turns out that she basically teleported herself to the Upside Down, and actually she doesn't stay there very long. She leaves, escapes through the doorway not too long after the events of season 1, but when she goes to Mike's house, she sees that there is a bunch of authorities there from Hawkins and decides not to reinsert herself into his life because of all the trouble she had already caused. This leads to her living in the woods like a nomad, and she is eventually found by Hopper, who takes her in and lets her live in his really small, crummy looking shack that is full of dust. Hopper and Eleven's relationship is very maternal. Hopper cares a lot about her. I think he sees Sarah in her, and he really wants to protect her, and he's really worried about all those Hawkins employees that are still looking for 11, because they really are. They're still actively trying to find her, so he decides that she needs to stay put. She can't leave the house. And he says eventually you're going to be able to leave and you're going to be able to go see Mike, but 11 gets really sick of this. She gets really sick of the maybe later, and she eventually has a big fight with Hopper. Another new character that we meet this season is Bob, played by Goonies and Lord of the Rings star Sean Astin. Bob is dating Will's mom this season, and he considers himself to be quite the tech mind. In fact, his nickname is Bob the Brain. Bob, while driving Will to school, tells Will that he too used to suffer from nightmares and that he had a nightmare with a really creepy guy who would come every night and harass him, but he stood up to that bully in the nightmare and said, "Go away!" And Will takes this advice and tries to apply it to his own situation with the Mind Flayer, but instead of the Mind Flayer going away, the Mind Flayer ends up taking over Will's body and possessing him. I know Bob had good intentions, but he kind of screwed Will over here. We need to talk about Dart. Dart is a baby demo dog that Dustin finds and decides to keep in his home. He even tells the gang about this and says that he thinks he might have discovered a brand new species, because at first it's not abundantly clear that Dart is a demo dog. However, it does become more clear after Dart eats Dustin's cat and starts having that 4-piece mouth that we all know the Demogorgon has. So they decide Demogorgon, dog, demo dog. Dustin and Steve eventually team up to try to capture and possibly kill Dart after Dustin discovers that his pet has grown in size and is looking very much like a Demogorgon. But we'll get back to that. Now, catching up with Lucas, he and Max end up forming a pretty solid bond, and he does eventually tell Max about the events of season 1, a story that she doesn't believe in the slightest until later on when she comes face to face with a Demogorgon during Dustin and Steve's half-baked attempt to eliminate Dart. After Will's possession, he starts having an adverse reaction to heat. He does not like it hot at all, and that's because the Mind Flayer, of course, does not like heat. And he tells his mom and Hopper that he is seeing visions of something evil that is spreading, and after being given a shit ton of paper, Will draws out a large tunnel system, and Hopper drives to those tunnels and discovers that the gate, the one way over at Hawkins' lab, has indeed been spreading. Hopper ends up getting stuck down there, and it is Will who has a vision that realizes that Hopper is in fact trapped in these tunnels. This leads to Bob's brain moment, where he realizes that this giant map system that Will has drawn out, all these vines or whatever is going on, he realizes that this is actually a map of Hawkins, and he is able to pinpoint exactly where Hopper is in this map system, which leads to Joyce, Will, Mike, and Bob all going to the scene to try to rescue Hopper, who is not doing good. They do end up rescuing Hopper, and while they are there, they get intercepted by some of the Hawkins lab employees who are there to try to control the situation. They start burning the tendrils down in these tunnels, which leads to Will basically glitching out. Let's quickly explain the burn. Earlier in the season, we see Dr. Owens mention that they had been burning the gate in the bottom of Hawkins' lab in order to prevent it from spreading, something that at some point must have stopped working because they missed a whole bunch of spreading in a massive tunnel system that was going on beneath Hawkins' feet. Anyways, the Mind Flayer does not like that they burnt those tendrils, and he makes Will lead some of these Hawkins employees into a certain section of the tunnel so he can basically trap them and kill them. We're making pretty good progress here, but I really want to stop and talk about Nancy, Steve, and Jonathan because there's shit going on with them too that is all really interesting. Nancy and Steve have been continuing to visit with Barb's parents because Nancy's feeling a huge amount of guilt over the demise of her friend, and her guilt leads to a drunken rant at a party where she basically confirms to Steve that, yeah, she doesn't love him, she likes someone else, I guess. Nancy eventually decides that she wants to tell Barb's parents the truth about what really happened, and when she and Jonathan attempt to meet up with Barb's mother at a park, they are intercepted by some of the Hawkins employees, which leads to them being brought to the lab and introduced to Dr. Owens. Nancy ends up recording a conversation with Dr. Owens that she believes will be incriminating and tries to team up with Murray to get the story out and expose Hawkins' lab for the dirty, corrupt stuff that they're doing. Now, Murray is a really fun character that we get to meet in this season. And this whole side quest that we have with Nancy and Jonathan not only expands Murray's role, but also eventually leads to Nancy and Jonathan becoming an item.
So, Jonathan, how was the pullout?
Switching gears back to 11, she manages to track down her mom, and while having a conversation with her mom, who we know is very debilitated, she finds out about a young girl who was at Hawkins' lab with her, a girl named Callie. This leads to 11 tracking down Callie, and it's in this episode that 11 learns how to unlock more of her powers, as well as learns when it's okay to take a life and when it's not. Now this episode, the episode The Lost Sister, gets a lot of bad feedback from people. As a matter of fact, I think people tend to put Stranger Things Season 2 lower just because of this one episode, which I think is absolutely ridiculous and silly because this episode, even if it hasn't come back yet, there was reasons for it. Things do happen in this episode that translate and move forward. Now, using 11's powers, Callie is basically able to track down another Hawkins employee with the intent of getting revenge against this guy, killing him. But 11 decides no, she decides not to do it, and she even stops Callie from doing it, which really makes Callie mad. It's at this moment that 11 realizes, I've got to go back. I found out that Hawkins is in danger, my friends are in trouble, and I don't think this is gonna work. At Hawkins' lab, we see that yes, Will has led those soldiers into a trap in the tunnel system, and the demo dogs, which were previously attacking Dustin, Steve, Lucas, and Max at the bus, all head to the tunnels to kill the soldiers, and then they start attacking the lab. This is where we get Bob's heroic sacrifice. Poor Bob. After escaping the lab, everyone reunites back at the buyer's house and they attempt to see if Will is indeed still inside this body or if he's totally gone. They come up with the idea of questioning Will in a way that'll make it so that he can't track down where they are, because if Will knows where they are, he's gonna send those demo dogs after them. So they take him out to the shed, they make the shed look totally blank, and they start to question him. And then they find out that Will is in fact in there and he is trying to communicate with them using Morse code with his fingers. He basically tells them they need to close the gates. But eventually a phone rings and Will realizes exactly where he is and sends those demo dogs there, which ends up leading to a really awesome reveal as 11 comes and saves the day. The moment when Mike and 11 see each other, I swear this was such a powerful moment. As a matter of fact, just all of them seeing 11, because they all thought that she was dead. It was a really special moment. And Mike, as you can understand, is pretty pissed at Harbour for keeping 11's existence alive. He had been grieving her, missing her, communicating with her every day, using his microphone or his radio, trying to reach out to her, hoping for any side that she was alive, and she was never allowed to communicate because Harbour wouldn't allow it. So yeah, Mike is pretty mad at Harbour. A plan is eventually formed, and Harbour and 11 head to the lab to close that gate. Dustin, Lucas, Mike, and Max all come up with a different plan. Their plan is to help clear out the lab so that 11 can get through safely, and their idea is to do what the soldiers did in those tunnels, burn those vines, because if those vines get burned, the Mind Flayer is going to send those demo dogs to defend the mines. Back at Hopper's house, Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy all try to get the Mind Flayer to leave Will's body, and they realize that instead of letting the Mind Flayer have these cool conditions that he or it wants, let's turn up the heat. They heat up this house really hot. They even poke Will with a hot metal prod, and eventually the Mind Flayer does leave Will's mouth and fly out into the distance. Jonathan then sends the okay to Hopper that yes, you can go ahead and close the gate. Now the reason they had to wait for this sequence of events is because we have established that Will has a hive mind connection to the Mind Flayer, into the Demo Dogs, into these vines, and if they close that gate while Will is still possessed by the Mind Flayer, it's going to kill not only the Demo Dogs, but it's also going to kill Will. So they had to get the Mind Flayer out of Will before 11 can close that gate, but eventually they do end up closing that gate, and 11 channels those brand new improved powers that she got during the Lost Sister episode that everyone hates, and she's able to successfully close that gate. In the end of the episode, we see that Murray has taken that recording he got from Nancy and exposed Hawkins' lab, and Hawkins' lab ends up clearing out, and it looks like they won against these scummy bad guys. We also get a really cute / sad scene at a school dance, and the season ends with a really ominous view of the Upside Down. We pan out from the school and we see the camera start to twist, and we see the upside down version of Hawkins' school, and the Mind Flayer is there looking down, basically saying, I'm still watching Will and I'm still watching Hawkins. We see right from the get-go that a team of Russian scientists are attempting to open a gate to the Upside Down. Why they would want to do that is a big mystery, but that's what's going on, and it sets the tone for what will be the main storyline for the rest of that third season. Moving on, since the second season ended, Mike and 11 have started full-on dating, and they are together so much that it really starts to irritate Hopper, who wants control back in his life and order. He has strict rules for 11 to keep the door open 3 inches at all times, but that doesn't seem to be discouraging the two lovebirds from their constant kissing. So Hopper eventually approaches Joyce and asks for some advice on how just to navigate this tricky situation. Together, the two of them come up with a plan for how to approach this matter delicately, but in typical Hopper fashion, the conversation with Mike turns more into threats than a positive conversation about boundaries. As a result of that conversation, Mike starts lying to 11 about why he can't hang out, which Elle senses is a lie pretty much from the get-go, and she goes to Max to sort things out. This season marks a big change between these two, because in season 2, 11 was very jealous of Max. She wanted to get rid of her just as much as Mike did, but in this season, season 3, they really bond and form a really tight friendship. Let's jump over to Nancy and Jonathan, who are working at the Hawkins Post. Jonathan as a photographer and Nancy as, well, a secretary. This is a time period where women were not valued all that well, and I'm not really sure we've changed too much since then, but even worse way back then. And for a strong personality like Nancy, it's not exactly easy for her to bite her lip, and she really wants to make a name for herself. So after taking a phone call from a woman who says she has rabbit rats, she decides to start her own investigation, and she drags Jonathan along with her. They go and speak to Miss Driscoll, and they confirm that for sure something is eating that fertilizer, and there is one heck of a crazy looking rat. Our first scene with Dustin shows us that he has been gone at a summer camp, and it's at this summer camp that he meets a girl named Susie, which most of the guys don't really believe even exist.
Girlfriend?
Which is why Dustin takes the gang out to a hill and shows them his new radio tower so he can make contact with her and prove that she does exist. But it doesn't end up working, he doesn't get a hold of her, but he does intercept a Russian transmission and ends up recording it and showing it to Steve, who is now working at Scoops Ahoy with a character that is new this season named Robin. Let's talk about Billy, the absolute cougar trap, because we see in the beginning of this season that the ladies of Hawkins are super impressed with this young man. In fact, they are waiting by the pool for an opportunity to get a glance at him, and that includes Nancy and Mike's mom, Mrs. Wheeler. She actually makes a plan with Billy to meet up with him for a special private tutoring lesson, but she decides at the last minute to not do it because I think she's feeling some serious guilt about possibly cheating on her husband. But it doesn't really matter, she wouldn't have been able to anyways because Billy ends up getting captured by the Mind Flayer and possessed. If Will was the victim of season 2, then Billy is certainly the victim of season 3, and even though he's an asshole, it's still a really tragic storyline. Remember, we found out in season 2 that Billy's dad is a big abusive prick. Now, one of the best things about Stranger Things is all these characters, and there's so many characters and there's so many storylines within these seasons. Joyce has her own side quest this season, one that first starts in episode 1 when she notices some of her magnets have lost some of their magnetism. This leads to her going and speaking to the kid's science teacher so that she can find out exactly what's going on. This woman is determined. But the thing is, she was supposed to actually go have dinner with Hopper when she actually went and talked to this guy about the magnets. So that really does not go over well with Hopper. He does not take getting stood up very well. While Max and 11 are hanging out, they come up with the idea to spy on some of their friends, and eventually Max convinces 11 to spy on her brother Billy. But as they attempt to see Billy, 11 notices something really strange of him. Not to mention, he seems like he actually saw her in the mind realm, which really freaks her out. This leads to her trying to find out just what Billy is up to. The two of them go to Billy's bedroom and discover a bloody whistle, which deepens the mystery even more and results in them going to the pool to figure out just what has happened to Chrissy, the girl who owned that whistle. Another big part of this season is the realization that youth cannot last forever, and you're not going to always stay in the basement hanging out with your friends no matter how much you really want to, and that is a lesson that Will ends up learning in this season, and it really does hurt him quite a bit. As a matter of fact, he gets so upset that he destroys Castle Byers, but while he's out in the rain with his emotions, he gets the chill, that neck-grabbing moment, and then he realizes the Mind Flayer is back. Switching back to Joyce, she meets up with Hopper, who is still livid that she stood him up to go talk science with another man, but then she mentions that there's a possibility something could be going on at the lab, because she finds out that the amount of energy needed to cause something to lose its magnetism is substantial, and there is one place for sure where they know could have that kind of technology, and that is at Hawkins' lab. However, Hawkins' lab was abandoned at the end of season 2, so Hopper seems a bit on the fence with this theory, but he does take her out there to explore and confirm that yes, it's not active anymore. But when they are at that lab, Hopper gets ambushed by a man who is clearly playing homage to the Terminator. Down to the way he speaks, the way he walks, his demeanor, the way he has that unstoppable approach, definitely giving me vibes of Terminator, and I'm pretty sure that is what the intention is supposed to be. Now this attack on Hopper eventually leads them back to the mayor, who Hopper saw speaking with this guy that beat him up. Hopper roughs up the mayor and is able to find out that the Russians have been buying up land around town and that the mayor has been helping them do it. As they continue that investigation into those different properties, they find a room with some mysterious Russians, but before they can find out what's going on, they get ambushed by that Terminator guy again. This time Hopper manages to escape with some of his dignity still intact. Back to Jonathan and Nancy, who are in the middle of some workplace drama. See, after they came across Miss Driscoll eating fertilizer, they end up getting fired by their boss, who by the way is acting weird and looks all sweaty. Why? Well, because him and his wife have both been converted to flayed by Billy and their daughter Chrissy. It was a fucked up scene, actually. We're starting to get to the point where the stories are starting to merge together, so let's keep going. So now that Will has mentioned to the group that the Mind Flayer is back, the kids come up with a plan to test to see if Billy is in fact infected, which leads to a really awesome moment in the sauna, and it confirms that yes, indeed, Billy is in fact flayed. Dustin, Steve, and Robin finally crack that Russian transmission and find out that there's an area in the back of Starcourt Mall where something shady is going down, but it's locked, and the only way to get through is in the vent system. The three convince Lucas' sister Erica to climb through the vents in exchange for free ice cream for life.
You know what this half-baked plan of yours sounds like to me? Child endangerment.
And once they are in this room, they realize it's not just a room, it's an elevator. They find that out when that thing starts to go down. It brings them all the way down to a secret Russian base that is beneath Hawkins, the very base where they are attempting to open the gate. Joyce and Hopper bring the Russian that they recovered, his name is Alexei, to Murray since he is able to speak Russian, and they find out exactly what the Russians are up to. They're opening a new gate, which prompts them to immediately decide we have to go find the kids. Joyce is thinking, oh god, Will's in trouble. And they end up going to a local town fair to find the kids. They think the kids might be there, and the kids are not there, but who is there is that crazy Russian guy that is basically a Terminator copycat, and he kills poor Alexei, who we were all just starting to get used to. Back to Nancy, who just saw Mrs. Driscoll basically go crazy and had black veins. Well, she reaches out to Steve, and the two of them meet up with the kids, and they finally find out that Billy is taken over. The whole gang ends up going to try to check on Miss Driscoll in the hospital, but as it turns out, the Mind Flayer was already expecting them and ambushes them. 11 is able to beat that disgusting blob creature, and then it later ends up joining with the rest of the Mind Flayer. It becomes this big nasty creature made up of sugar, spice, and everything nice. Eventually the Mind Flayer attacks the kids, this time at Hopper's cabin, and during the attack one of the tentacles of the creature bites 11 and plants a creature into her leg, which ends up resulting in her losing her powers. Back to Steve, Dustin, Robin, and Erica, who are all down in that Russian lab. Well, Steve and Robin end up getting captured and tortured, but Dustin and Erica are able to come back and rescue them. The four of them manage to escape to the mall, but they are pursued, and in order to keep them hidden, Dustin decides to hide Steve and Robin in that theater, hoping that they'll just stay there while he goes and figures out a plan, but they end up wandering off. And it's during this scene when Steve and Robin wander off that we find out that Robin is a lesbian. Poor Steve ends up finding that out because he just professed how much he likes this girl, only for her to say, I don't like that side, I'm sorry. Now, they do end up getting spotted, and they have to make a run for it through the mall, and just as they are about to get captured by the Russians, 11 shows up and saves the day. Eventually, Joyce, Hopper, and Murray catch up with the kids at the mall, and they come up with a plan to destroy the gate yet again. We get a big battle at the mall, which results in Billy dying, a scene that was really quite sad. But Billy does end up getting a redemption moment in this episode, because previously 11 was able to enter his mind, and she saw his past, and she saw exactly what was going on, and she's able to break through to Billy and reach the Billy that is still inside by mentioning this memory to him, which snaps him out, and he sacrifices himself to save her, which unfortunately Max sees and is just absolutely devastated. They might not have had the best relationship, but that was her brother. And another sad scene comes as Joyce and Hopper finally make it to the gate. Something goes wrong, and Hopper is unable to escape the blast. It appears that he died, but in the end credits, we see a Russian prison, and in this Russian prison, they are going and grabbing somebody to feed them to a Demogorgon that, for some reason, we should find out more about. Russia has a Demogorgon. They mention that there's an American in one of the cells, and that American very well may be Hopper. But since Hopper is presumed dead, Joyce takes in 11, and then she packs up the family, and they move out of Hawkins to get away from all the bad shit that's went down. Season 4 starts with a flashback of Dr. Brenner and shows us a scene which will prove very critical for the entire story, not just for this season, but the entire series. The scene ends with Dr. Brenner in a room full of dead kids and shows us a young 11 covered in blood. It looks like she killed everybody, but we will find out throughout this season that that's absolutely not the case. At the end of season 3, Joyce moved across the country with Will, Jonathan, and 11. But things in California have not been smooth sailing for 11, who is now going by the name Jane. She is the constant target of a bully by the name of Angela, who seems to really have it out for 11 for some reason. Elsewhere in Hawkins, Lucas has joined the basketball team and he's hanging out with a bunch of douchebags, while Mike and Dustin, on the other hand, have joined a D&D club called the Hellfire Club, led by the very enigmatic and extremely memorable Eddie, played by, of course, Joseph Quinn. Like I said, his career took a big boost after this season. As we catch up with Max, we see that she is very much in a dark place compared to where she was in season 3. Max never really had the greatest of life, but she's feeling extra dark here, and who can really blame her? She did watch her brother Billy get killed by a giant monster. She's even been talking to the school counselor, and it's gotten to the point where her friends and everyone in her life are starting to worry about her, especially Lucas. By the way, we see that her and Lucas are not dating anymore. I don't know what happened, but at some point they just broke up. Jumping to Joyce, she receives a box that contains a doll that is marked as having come from Russia, and after speaking with Murray, she's able to open this doll and find that it has a secret note that mentions Hopper is actually alive and gives her a phone number to call. Now let's talk about a new face that we see in this opening episode and not anymore after that, and her name is Chrissy. Chrissy is a cheerleader, and she becomes the first victim of Vecna, the season's main villain. She starts seeing awful visions, which prompts her to reach out to Eddie in order to get some drugs to make these visions go away. But while she's at Eddie's place waiting for him to get the drugs, she is killed by Vecna in full view of Eddie, who is now officially traumatized. Being that Max lives across the street from Eddie, she sees a large police presence and immediately goes to Dustin to explain that his buddy Eddie is about to become a suspect in a murder. Dustin dismisses the idea that Eddie could have anything to do with the murders, but in order to make sure nothing happens, he and Max start trying to track down Eddie, and they end up visiting Steve and Robin at the video store and use the address of a guy who's been renting movies to find out where Eddie is hiding. Meanwhile, Nancy, having heard about the crime, decides that she wants to head out to the scene and ends up speaking to Eddie's uncle, who assures her that Eddie had nothing to do with these murders, but instead he claims it was a man named Victor Creel. We're going to learn a lot about Victor Creel throughout the season, and he is very important. Nancy is very much onto something here. So is the friend that she brought to the scene with her, Fred, aka Vecna's second victim. Back in California, we see Mike arrive for a vacation, and he and 11 go to the roller rink, where we get a full view of how just sick of Angela's bullying 11 really is.
Angela!
And I gotta say, I don't feel bad for Angela at all. 11 and Mike had been planning this vacation for months, and this was a very bitchy move. Just nasty. Still in California, Murray arrives, and he and Joyce end up making contact with the person on that phone number who says that Hopper is alive and that for $40,000 he can help him escape. His name is Dimitri, and he's a prison guard at the facility that is holding Hopper hostage. Sticking with Hopper for a bit, we do get to see what happened after his apparent demise in season 3. Most of his storyline really involves trying to escape the prison a plan that goes through so many hurdles. Back in Hawkins, Dustin, Max, Steven, and Robin finally track down where Eddie is, who tells them exactly what happened at the trailer, and this is where we get the first mention of the name Vecna. With there now being 2 mysterious deaths in Hawkins, first Chrissy and then Fred, the military is put on notice, and we end up meeting one of this season's 2 biggest pests. This guy and this prick, Colonel Jack Sullivan. We see throughout the season that he is a brutal and determined man who will stop at nothing to capture 11. Now, the other pest is Jason, and he is the guy who was dating Chrissy. He's the captain of the basketball team and somebody that we first meet as being friends with Lucas. Lucas is trying to get in good with these jocks. He wants to be popular for once in his life. But thankfully, eventually, Lucas snaps out of hanging out with this douchebag and goes back to his original friends where he belongs. As a result of her serious attack on Angela, 11 ends up getting arrested, but before she can get taken to the juvenile detention facility, Dr. Owen shows up and rescues her, and he explains to her that Hawkins is in danger, and he has a way to help her get her powers back because they need her to save Hawkins. After Eddie explains what he saw to everybody, the group decided to split up and find out what they can about Victor Creel and about Vecna's first 2 victims, hoping that there's some kind of answers there. Nancy and Robin end up going to the library where they end up coming across evidence that Vecna's first kill may in fact be the kill that Victor Creel was blamed for all those years before. Meanwhile, Dustin, Steve, and Max break into the school counselor's office to find her patient notes, and Max quickly discovers that she's been having the same side effects as Vecna's first 2 victims. It's at the moment where Max realizes this that she starts to first hear that grandfather clock. Now believing that she is next to die, Max starts writing letters explaining to everyone how she feels about them, which is obviously pretty upsetting. And after Max drops off some letters at her house, we see her get pulled into another vision from Vecna, who warns her that it's almost time. Nancy and Robin continue to look into the mystery of Victor Creel, hoping that he may provide some insight into Vecna and perhaps how he was able to survive this so-called night where his family was attacked by a demon. They pose as students and get to talk to Victor, who tells them about the night that everything went wrong, as well as the spooky things and visions that he and his wife had been seeing. Robin is able to pick up on a small detail that he mentions about the night the killings happened. He mentions hearing a song and then waking up from the trance to find his family dead, and this is really important. Let's pick back up with Joyce and Murray, who have finally made it to Russia to meet up with the man who is supposed to help them rescue Harbour, Yuri. But Yuri has a different plan of his own. He decides that he wants to keep the $40,000 ransom money and he wants to collect the reward. He throws that whole plan that they had into the toilet, causing not only Harbour to get recaptured after having just made it away, but he also causes Dimitri to get captured, and then he drugs Joyce and Murray. That bastard. Jumping back to California, after 11 was picked up by Dr. Owens, he sent some of his men to guard Will, Mike, and Jonathan at their house, but it all goes to shit when the military shows up looking for 11. Now, the boys do end up escaping with Argyle, who comes and gets them just in the nick of time, but unfortunately, one of the guards that they're with gets shot, and he is unable to tell them where this lab with 11 is. But he does give them a pen that actually proves to be pretty important. This pen contains a message, and that message contains a phone number. Back in Hawkins, Max decides that she has one last letter to deliver, one for her brother Billy, but while she is speaking to Billy's grave, Vecna makes his move on Max.
Max. Max.
This was one of the strongest episodes of the season and led to that song Running Up the Hill going super viral and giving Kate Bush a whole new wave of popularity. Dr. Owens and 11 finally make it to the new secret lab, and it's revealed that indeed Dr. Brenner is alive. This is something that has been hinted at since season 2. 11 is obviously upset, but the plan is to help her gain her powers back by putting her in a sensory deprivation tank and having her relive some vital memories that Brenner believes will unlock her powers. But 11 isn't aware of the plan or that she's been put into a repeating memory, and as she experiences more and more of this memory, she does start to see her powers slowly return. As a matter of fact, she thinks that she's got her full powers back and makes a run for it to try to escape and makes quick work of the guards. She actually is able to push the guards away, but then when Dr. Brenner approaches her, she's not able to redo it. And he says, "Did you really think it would be that easy? You still have more to learn." And she does agree and goes back to stay in this facility to learn more. After the attack on Max, the gang is clearly on edge, keeping a constant eye on her and making sure that she's got Kate Bush close course at all times. But when Max starts drawing some of the things that she saw in the dream world, Nancy recognizes immediately that she is drawing the home of Victor Creel. They go check out this house and they're all carrying flashlights because this place is totally dark and abandoned. And when they are there with their flashlights, they notice that their flashlights are starting to do that thing that we saw in season 1. And as they move around the house, they start to realize that what they are seeing is Vecna in that house, be it he's in the upside down version, but he's there. He's literally in that house. During this scene, we also get a glimpse of Vecna taking his next victim, a guy named Patrick, who is a friend to Jason and probably not a great person to begin with. Back in California, Mike, Will, Jonathan, and Argyle come up with a plan to find out where this new lab is after they got that phone number, but they don't know what to do with it. When they call that phone number, it just gives them a dial tone. You know that tone from dial-up internet? That's what it gives them. So Mike decides they need to go to somebody who knows how to unlock the secret mystery that they have, and that somebody is Susie. Let's not forget, while all this is going on, the military is still hot on 11's tracks. The relentless Colonel Jack even going so far as to torture to get the info he needs. He believes firmly that all these deaths and mayhem are coming for sure from 11. Now, after getting that address from Susie, Mike, Will, Jonathan, and Argyle all start to drive to where the lab is. Now, let's catch up with Joyce, who was just captured by the scummy Yuri. While he is transporting them on a plane to bring them to the Russians, Murray and Joyce end up getting loose and end up crashing the plane, but luckily they survive and are able to capture Yuri. After tying him up and threatening to leave him to die, Yuri finally agrees to tell them where this Russian base is, and they come up with a plan to rescue Hopper that involves Murray pretending to be Yuri, Joyce pretending to be a prisoner, and Yuri being forced to pretend to be Murray. He didn't really have any say in that. Switching back to 11, we continue to see more of her memories, and we see her befriend an orderly who at first comes off as a very kind and caring person, but what he really wanted was to get on her good graces so that she could remove a chip from his neck, a chip that just so happened to be keeping him under control because this guy's got serious problems. He's actually the psychotic Henry Creel, and he is the one who killed those people, his mom and his sister, not Victor. So it turns out that carnage that we had been seeing glimpses of, that 11 had been seeing glimpses of, came not from her, but from Henry. And he even tries to attack 11, but she ends up throwing his ass into a portal that she opened, and this is the first gate that gets opened. And as Henry is falling through that upside down, he starts getting electrocuted and zapped and burnt to a crisp until he turns into one ugly son of a bitch. Back to Nancy and the gang. After meeting up with Eddie, who has once again witnessed a Vecna kill, they find out that there is a gate in the water at Lover's Lake, and while searching for it, Steve gets pulled in, and Robin, Nancy, and Eddie jump in right after them. Of course, the two girls do it first. Eddie is very hesitant. He's not necessarily brave. So with them all on the upside down, they were able to, fight off and save Steve, and they ended up getting trapped there because some of the demo bats come and guard the gate. Hopper and Dimitri prepare to fight the Demogorgon that the Russians have turned into an experimental pet. And it turns out that's actually not the only Demogorgon they have. They actually have a whole bunch of them in tanks as well. Not a good idea at all. But just as this fight is about to really take a bad turn, Hopper is rescued from the pit by Murray and Joyce, who were able to trick the Russian guards. And with Hopper finally safe, we get a really awesome reunion between he and Joyce, and a kiss that I think we've all been looking forward to, right? I forgot to mention something that happens with Nancy when they are leaving the upside down through Eddie's trailer. She gets pulled into a trance by Vecna, who allows her to escape instead of killing her like he did the others, because he wants her to deliver a message to 11. He shows her a glimpse of what his plan is, and it's not good. Now armed with the knowledge that Vecna is creating new gates every time he kills somebody, they realize that when he ends up getting 4 kills, he's going to be able to tear a rift in the upside down in the real world. Basically, he's going to make a massive gate, and he needs these 4 kills. That whole chime with the grandfather clock has actually been indicating what he's doing the whole time. So now they come up with a plan that involves multiple steps, including using Max as bait to distract Vecna. Now, while this is going on, 11 is still in that facility learning to use her powers, and she has more control than she had before. As a matter of fact, she's finally able to enter the mind realm, and when she's in the mind realm, she finds out about this this plan that her friends are making to attack Vecna. And she ends up telling Dr. Owens, it's time to leave. My friends are in danger and I need to be there for them. And you promised I could leave whenever I want. Dr. Owens says yes, but Dr. Brenner says, you're not ready. He ends up capturing Dr. Owens and he drugs 11 and tries to hold her hostage. But not long after that, the military catches up and Papa ends up bleeding out on the ground. Not gonna lie though, this man is a slippery little rat. I wouldn't be surprised if he is in season 5. I mean, did we officially see him die? Now that Mike, Will, Jonathan, and Argyle have caught up with 11, they come up with a plan for Elle to be able to help Max with her plan without actually making it all the way to Hawkins because they just don't have time to make it.
So you actually think this can work?
A bathtub would help.
Yeah, gotta be clean to enter the mind.
What?
Elle plans on using a piggyback to enter Max's mind and intervene when Vecna starts attacking. Now in the final episode, we see the plan to defeat Vecna take place. Dustin and Eddie distract the demo bats in the Upside Down by playing Metallica, which leads them away from the house, Victor Creel's house, and paves the way for Robin, Steve, and Nancy to enter the house and kill Vecna, who is now in a trance because he's currently going after Max.
It's okay. I'm coming.
But it seems like Vecna might have been onto this plan the whole time because Nancy, Steve, and Robin all end up getting captured by the vines. Now rescued and free and ready to go back home, Hopper comes up with a new plan. He realizes that there is a gate open in Hawkins and that the kids are probably in danger, so he comes up with a plan to attack a demo dog, which of course is going to affect any of the creatures connected to that hive mind. 11 is finally able to enter Max's mind and she catches Vecna by surprise, but she was in fact not ready at all. Papa was right, and poor Max does end up getting the worst end of this deal as her bones start to break. I swear my heart stopped during this moment. I thought, no, just no. But just as it looks like Max is done for, Mike is able to motivate 11 to power up even more, and she's able to stop Vecna before he can carry out the rest of his gruesome attack on Max. But it turns out that the damage he did to her was so severe that she does end up dying, giving Vecna that 4th kill he needs, and that causes the giant gate to rip open throughout Hawkins. Now freed from those vines, Nancy, Steve, and Robin all light Vecna on fire and give it to him. And we get to see Nancy take that shotgun and blast his ass. She knocks him right out of a window, but then when they go out to the ground to check where he landed, homeboy's gone. And we see that Max, who was clinically dead, ended up being saved by 11, who I guess can bring people back to life. That's going to be a useful skill going forward, I assume. But Max is not all right. She is in a coma, and when 11 attempts to enter Max's mind to see what's going on, all she sees is darkness. There's nothing there. Final shot that we see of this season shows that the gate is spreading across Hawkins, and the Upside Down is starting to bleed through into our world.